The Advent season for us, the theme is about light this year. There's a passage that we tend to use for Christmas that is kind of interesting because it meets a prophecy, but in fact, it's not a Christmas thing at all. It's really later on in the life of Christ. But let's see how we do reading this together. We're going to read Matthew 4:15. And I'm going to do a 1, 2, 3 count, and then everybody can just chime in with me on 3, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. For us, you know what? Really doesn't mean that much, does it? You just read that. I wouldn't be surprised, I'm sure in churches everywhere, when we read the light has dawned, there will probably be people yawning even as we read it. Strange names. Can you find Naphtali on a map? How about Ephraim? I'm not condemning anyone on this or judging anyone. The fact is just where we tend to be at this point in time, is that we'll read this and we'll think it's nice poetry and we realize it's a little ominous. And then we'll leave church this morning. We'll go back to our Christmas shopping, or if you're on the lake, and read the highlights to your pictures with Santa and this stuff going on. In reality, what happens in this season in our culture? What really happens in this culture? Well, even church people get distracted. Some of us get overwhelmed. Social anxieties. Did I remember everybody on the list? Who do I need to get a gift for? Is this a good enough gift? Did I get everybody a card? Make sure I have it on our card table in the fellowship hall later. Don't want to get anything wrong. Oh, so there's so much to do through this Christmas season. For some of us, it'll be tension in the household, and there'll be more than one home where somebody will say, "Why can't we just be a normal family?" That's the way it is. Statistically, if things stay with the way statistics are, in this season, there will be a wave of holiday depression. And people will fall in a lot of darkness. And after, there'll be a wave of post-holiday depression and even a wave of suicides that tend to spike through this season. If on the spiritual side, I don't know. We'll probably do a lot of traditional and sentimental things and then confuse that for actual spirituality. Some of you might be brave, good folks, and you'll actually say, "Have a blessed Christmas," when you visit the cashier at Walmart. Just getting at this fact, the reality of it is that there'll be as much darkness as there is light through this season. That is just the truth of it. So right now, you came in, you were feeling pretty good. You saw all the cheery lights that we had up here, and you went, "I'm starting to feel the Spirit a little bit," and then now you're going, "That has got to be the most depressing Christmas sermon ever." Well, that's not the idea. It's not the idea is to depress us, but the idea is to make sure we start from reality. Because if you come in here and you have nothing but smoke and mirrors or glitter and tinsel, however you want to look at it, the joy you feel is going to be very short-lived. But if we can start from reality, maybe by the time we're finished the season, we'll have a joy that can't be stripped away from you. Something that'll be far more real. You probably noticed as it went in, you thought, "Wow, I wonder if Mike back there even made a mistake on the slides." The first slide up is the conclusion, and you think, well, that should be at the end, not at the introduction on your slides. But actually, it's there for a reason, because we're dealing with a premise. And it starts with this question of experiencing this joy. How do we actually get into the reality of the season? And I came to a conclusion as I thought about this passage and why we can be so lukewarm even as we're hearing it. I came to this conclusion. A first step in appreciating the greatness of this light that we're talking about, this light that has dawned, a first step in appreciating the greatness of that light lies in comprehending the depth and the width of the darkness in which we are in. That shadows us even now in this world. We can't appreciate the light without comprehending the darkness. So that's what we're going to do today. That's where we start in the reality of things and where the story of darkness, even the story of the text that we read through, where it comes from. Where did that text come from? Well, it actually didn't start with Matthew. The story goes back another 7 centuries to another time. And in that time, it was actually as dark as things can be. We go back to the time of Isaiah. And Isaiah saw some pretty dark times. Let me read you something in fuller length and maybe a little context on the text, because it's a prophecy. He has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond Jordan. And catch, this is an important line, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has a light shone. You have multiplied the nations. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. And here's where it picks up that you probably remember the text. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of the peace there will be no end on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth forevermore. The zeal of the Lord hosts will do this. And there's a beautiful line. I love the ending. And the zeal of the Lord's hosts will do this. Not your zeal, not my zeal, not their zeal, the zeal of the Lord. So it starts with this reality check, and it says they have, it doesn't say they lived in darkness. It says they dwelled. It says they sat in it. And I love that the wording is clever like that, because you know what? When you're really in darkness, you're not living, you're just existing. In the higher sense of the word, you're just existing. So that's what they were doing. They were walking in it. They were taking up space in it. They made their homes in it. But you really couldn't call it living. Well, how did this darkness look in the time of Isaiah? And if I didn't say, just to bring us back, we're nearly 3,000 years into the past. Well, the first thing is that the nation that he was living in was like a bad church. The first casualty is unity. It always is when churchy people move away from the God they're supposed to be professing. And the nation of Israel now is divided into two. You've got a northern kingdom holding on to the name Israel, and the southern kingdom holding on to the temple called Judah, or it was mainly the tribe of Judah, so they called it Judah, the remnant. And they hated each other. Oh, man. Glad that never happens in churches. Glad nobody in churches hate anyone. If we read between the lines and maybe a bit beyond into the next few chapters, we find out a whole bunch of stuff. As the prophet Isaiah is writing, it's at the end of this golden age. This King Jeroboam II has ended, and in the 20 years that follow, things have pretty much gone to pieces. 4 kingships end in assassination. Only one king gets to get his own son on the throne. The corruption in the government runs really dark and deep. The nation is rotting from the inside out. And outside of their borders, darkness is gathering like a storm. God was rejected at the highest levels of government, and it is a cruel and unstable government. And things like this are going on in that nation. The nation thinks they're really clever because they're forging alliances with questionable partners. And the minds that would still follow what God says, you're making a bad decision, they are going to devour you. And of course, history proves that's true. Nationalism is strong in both of these little kingdoms now, and it's confused for honoring God. Glad that we never mix up nationalism and Christianity anymore. Reliance on human wisdom's at an all-time high, because you see, when you're surrounded by darkness, you know what you do? You either fight against it or you become it. And all this darkness around them sounds pretty good. All this human reasoning sounds pretty good. So they're buying into it and rejecting the legacy and inheritance. The religion is corrupted. There are the high places that are set up, and they have nothing to do with who they used to call the one true God. Social anarchy is at all-time new levels. Everyone hates everyone in this place. And if we read on through more of Isaiah, we'd find he uses this amazing image of fire. Is that the wickedness is like the smoke of a forest fire. Don't know if you've ever been around where there's been a large fire. Ever been anywhere where there's a lot of smoke blowing? I mean, a lot of smoke. Or maybe in a house where a lot of people are smoking. Maybe that's close enough to give the analogy. But the point is that smoke has this way of getting into everything. And places you don't even anticipate. It can ruin your electronics. It gets into everything. And you have no choice but to breathe it in yourself. And so there you are, you're stuck. There's no choice. He's saying that that's what the wickedness of the time was like. You couldn't help it. It was everywhere. It was get into everything. Wickedness has a way of doing that. Sin has a way of doing, darkness has a way of doing that. It's the way you say hello. It's the way you drive on the road. It's the things you value. It's the career you choose. It's what gives you joy in life, if you want to put it that way, pleasure, I guess. But the anarchy in the society was at an all-time high. And the affluence had an effect. See, they were coming off of a golden age. And people feel entitled when they come off of a golden age, that things had gone well for their parents, so I am entitled to have it go well for me. And that's where they were, coming off of the reign of Jeroboam. And so people were addicted to material things. Wealth meant a whole lot to them, except it wasn't satisfying anyone in this time. As a matter of fact, the way Isaiah puts it, he says, each devours the flesh of his own arm. The family unit had broken down, both immediate and extended. He talks about how one tribe after Manasseh hates Judah, and Judah hates Manasseh, and Ephraim hates Judah and Manasseh, and it goes on. There's just a breakdown in the extended family. The society then is also polarized. Everybody hates everybody. You have all kinds of camps going on. Capitalism was interesting. Now, they probably have a different word for it back then. But the way wealth worked in the time was it was a theocracy. It was a nation under God. God had laid down laws and morals by which to do everything. So when you were rich, there was a way to spread your wealth. There was morals and mitigating factors on how to deal fairly with everyone else. But when God's rejected, the morals go out the window. And if you take the morals out, all you have left then is people with power. And when people have power and no moral boundaries, then what do? They step on anyone who's in their way. And that is the way that it was going there. A scholar puts it in a wonderful way. He says this: postmodernism is as old as the time of Isaiah. Did anything that I say kind of sound strangely familiar to you? Welcome to postmodernism. It's as old as Isaiah. The meaning of darkness, if you were looking at that and say, well, when these passages say darkness, what are they even really talking about? How's the simplest terms you could put it in is simply this: the absence of God's face. God's face, his impact is no longer there. The Hebrew term for the way we read that thing about the shadow of death, salmoet, literally means death shadow. You're living in a death shadow. The wages of sin is what? Well, if we turn this into a mathematical equation of sorts, we could say this: darkness equals the absence of God. The absence of God equals sin, and sin equals death. Takes us back to that raging fire. The smoke goes everywhere. It affects life in ways you don't even anticipate. So here's the reality. How do you deal with darkness if it's that pervasive, if it's that strong, if it's that everywhere that even as Christians it's tugging on you? It's a huge, huge problem, isn't it? How do we deal with it? Well, let's move ahead into the light in Christ time. And it's into this level of darkness that the light would dawn. See, it's one thing if we say, well, the great thing about Jesus is he'll improve me a little bit, or, he can help me with this little problem or that little problem in life. I hope we're getting to the understanding here that when we're talking about the light that dawned, it wasn't about the little problems, it's about the impossibility of the darkness. It's stronger than that. That's why the light came into the world. That's what it's all about, overwhelming that level of darkness. That must be one powerful light. It must be one powerful light. According to the prophecy, it says, this light that's going to dawn is going to be the deliverance of anybody who grabs hold of it. This light that's going to dawn is going to be true royalty, not the fake kings of old Israel, true royalty. And it'll be from the promise of David. Why is that important to us? We're not Jewish. Because this promise to David, once again made some 3,000 years ago, God has seen it through. God doesn't break his promises. This light would come through the line of David, and we know from history it has. This light would be divine. It's called the mighty God himself. This light would be a son who would be given. And he would literally be a wonder of a counselor, if you transliterate the phrase from the passage. His work and his wisdom would be supernatural, beyond human understanding. He would be the government of peace, and he'd keep expanding, and he would be forever. And the light would not just be the presence of God, it would be the power to understand God, the power to experience God, the power to be changed by God, the power to change your thinking, your values, your traits, the fabric of your soul, the power to see the vision of God. And he would write it down, not on tablets of stone, but there would come a time when it would be written on our very hearts. In other words, it would become an instinct of that soul. But here is this wonderful promise, and man, did they need it in the time of Isaiah. And the context of the words actually fit back then too. But Isaiah was saying something beyond even what he realized. It would be another 7 centuries before we actually see it come to pass. Another 7 centuries, enough time that this idea that took deep root among the Jewish people through all their trials would be there would be an anointed one. There would come a Messiah, and he was going to carry out all of this deliverance that he was talking about. Wouldn't come the way they thought, but it would come. If you moved to those 7 centuries later, we come to a place where now Rome is the superpower. And they insisted on this land of Palestine or Israel, whatever you want to call it. It was called Judea. Interesting. Why Judea? Well, let me take you into just a quick little shot of history. If we go back to the time of Isaiah, within that end of his time, both the northern and southern kingdom would fall. The northern kingdom would fall to the most brutal people that ever were, the Assyrian Empire, and they would never be seen again. And 10 of the tribes would disappear from forever from history. The southern kingdom was mainly the tribe of Judah. And Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Simon were mixed in there, but it was mainly Judah was a big tribe. So when the remnant, Judah, the southern kingdom, fell to Babylon, it was the tribe of Judah. And then miraculously, not heard of in history before, they were allowed to go back and rebuild their homeland. Well, the main group of people to come back was the tribe of Judah, and hence, from then on, they are called Jews. And when Rome comes to power and they call this place Judea, it's a reminder. Remember, you people are slaves. Remember that you were already a conquered people. And Judea, using that name, kind of just rubbed it in a little bit. And in this land of Judea, there was a prophecy of a very unlikely place. Up to the north that would seem to be half pagan. It was called Galilee. And some prophecies said that the Messiah somehow would be coming down from that area. Why? What a place. Galilee. Galilee actually means circle. The word means circle. And the reason that it's called circle is because it's encircled by something. There's a bulge there in the nation, and everything around it is non-Jewish countries. It is this little area surrounded, circled by non-Jewish nations. So what it means is that Galilee of the Gentiles was a phrase that was rarely used in that full sense. And by saying that, what the prophecy is saying is when this anointed one comes, when this light comes, it won't just be for the people of Israel, it'll be for the whole world. It'll be for everyone. And the prophecy gets somewhat twisted up in that 700 years, but that's what it meant, and that is what happened. How do I know? Because you're sitting there today. The reason you are sitting in here today is because 2,000 years ago, and then 700 years before that, God said this is going to happen. And poof, here you are. Here you are. History has proven it out. This light would come and he would shine forever. In the time of Isaiah, the real meaning was, it came down to Isaiah 7:14 says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." That meant something different in the time of Isaiah. It had to do with promise and deliverance, but he had no idea the big picture that would be coming down. History says and proves to us that came down. But that's not when we see the light dawn. Jesus does not take on, the scripture does not crown him with this wonderful prophecy until something else happens. He goes out for 40 days into the desert. He faces Satan. He faces the temptation of the world, the temptations within himself, the temptations and the trials of all. Takes upon himself that, and he comes out choosing God, choosing his Father's will, choosing to do what he's here to do. And then this passage is bestowed on him. Only then is it laid on him. Follows quickly after that story, what we just read in Matthew 4:16 earlier. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. Jesus went out into the darkness himself. And for those dwelling in the region and the shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. The darkness was deep in the time of Isaiah, and a promise was made. The darkness was just as deep in the time of Christ when he walked on this earth, and a promise was fulfilled. The darkness is still the same darkness with us today, and the same light has dawned. If we understand the darkness a little bit as far as its depth, then maybe we can gain an appreciation for the light that has dawned. Okay, wonderful. Thanks for the history lesson. What do you take when you go from here? What's the use of anything that was said? There's a few things I hope that stick and you take away about this lesson of darkness. I hope that you see that darkness is darkness. There's no way around it. Whether it's made to look pretty, no matter how it pervades into your life, darkness is darkness, and it always leads to something ugly. I'm hoping that we see that in the spiritual darkness, we latch on a little bit to that idea of the smoke, because it is everywhere, in everything, and in itself and by itself, we have no choice. It's like being in the car with a chain smoker. You can't help but breathe it in. It is everywhere. And we are such natural containers when we are left to ourselves. All of us can be pretty darn dark. All of us can get pretty dark. I hope we take away from us that if we understand that, then we start to understand the power of the light. Because the light that's promised here is to take over that type of darkness. It's to take away that type of darkness. And you choose it. You choose it. That's the big thing. You have a choice. Here, I bugged Bob, and he gave me his tactical flashlight. Anybody else got one of these things? Pretty bright. I could tell. In the first service, the people I could tell have, because when I went like this, anybody who had one went, even before it went on. So I promise not to do that to you. But they're really something, aren't they? They're made for two reasons, really. One, it's a weapon. It's a defensive thing. Somebody's attacking you, and you're supposed to click the light on and dazzle them, and then they leave you alone or whatever. You get away. The other thing is just it's a weapon against darkness. We saw one little video. It was amazing. This thing, they had a car lights, and you could see a little bit in the video, and then they turned on whatever tactical light they had, and it was like the whole neighborhood just lit up. It was pretty amazing. So they do quite a bit. But here's the thing: is I have this light. Is this light doing me any good right now? No, I believe in this light. I think it must be super nifty. I'm willing to go out and preach the gospel of this light. But personally, you know what? It's really not doing much for me. Well, why not? Well, because I haven't turned it on. I personally have not pushed the button. Here's a thought, maybe think of it philosophically, but if this room were totally dark, say I just told Eric, I'm not telling you, Eric, but I told Eric, turn off every light in the place, and it got really dark in here. And I have the potential to light up this room. But if I never push the button, what am I really choosing? Well, darkness, because I chose not to let the light shine. So it comes down to pushing the button. Well, what happens? You'll notice when this slide came up, here's where I was. Well, I'll let you in on my thinking. This is really scary. Anybody who goes into the mind of Kevin, it's a scary place to be, I realize. But when I was doing this, I was looking at the time of Isaiah and what made it a dark place. And you can't help but look into our own time. And a few things come to mind, like, We run around talking about how free and enlightened and how everything is people are free to do their own thing in our culture today. And yet, slavery is the highest it's ever been in human history. And what's even worse is slavery in days of old had to do with military conquest and material for your nation and empire. Now we have a type of slavery that is totally based on perversion. It's all based on perversion, and it's everywhere. That's pretty dark. We have darkness of loneliness. We've got a lot of marginalized people in nursing homes or wherever that are left on their own. We have darkness in our substance abuse. We have a polarized society that is so willing to fight for and against anything that doesn't fit right in their needs. We're so much in the political correctness. And in Isaiah's time, did I mention this? Is in Isaiah's time, it was politically correct to the point of Nazi level, in that there was a lot of darkness around, but don't dare talk about it. You can embrace it. You can take in the thinking of the pagan nations. You can do whatever you want, but never criticize what we're doing. How did Isaiah die? Well, as he was speaking against what was going on, he was killed in a way that they used. He was executed by putting him into a log and sawing him in two. That's how they executed in that time. Who did it? The leaders of the day, because they didn't like all the stuff he was saying. How different is that than today? In a postmodern society where, you can say everything you want, but just don't disagree with us, or we'll end up in a war, whether it's politics, morals, religion, whatever. And you can't resist the girl with the duck face. If I never see a duck face again, I'll be so happy. But what's going on is narcissism. Wow, it's all about me. This is me wherever I am. All kinds of darkness, just like in that day. And the idea with the light is that darkness, yes, it is there, but I have a choice now. I have a light for me. Pretty bright, real quick. But if I turn the light on the darkness, and I'm going to need a little help there from my friends at the back, but there is the idea I'm going for, is that even as the darkness is there, there is something to counter it. There is something to make it fade away. There's something other than the darkness itself. But that can't happen even if I own one of these, unless I push the button. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with that. I'm sure you can see that I'm saying that Christ is the light of the world. And the pushing of the button is a continual choice. Maybe that's one fault of the evangelical church in days past. We went for this intentional salvation moment. That's why even with an altar, and there's nothing wrong, there should be a time, if we haven't made an intentional choice to follow God, there needs to be. But it's not one time. You're making that choice every moment of every day. As long as you're breathing, you're choosing to press the button or not press the button. A light has dawned. It's powerful. It's more powerful than the darkness. It's in your possession if you've accepted it and you hold to it. But it doesn't mean anything to you either unless you push the button and make it part of your own experience.